And we are live. Welcome to those of you who just got the notification. We are going to give it a couple of minutes to give everyone a chance to log in. So grab your coffee, or depending on what time zone you are logging in from, maybe just a cup of tea or something a little stronger. I know we have a lot of folks logging in from all over the globe. So welcome. Again, we're just going to give it a couple of minutes to give you a chance to get settled. And for those of you who are just getting in to this webinar, if you want to drop in the comments where you are logging in from, I know we have a global community here with WooRank, and we would love to know. Oh, we got a couple. Okay, so we have good evening from Germany. Welcome. And yeah, anyone else who's just logging in right now, if you want to go ahead and drop in the comments where you are logging in from, we would love to know. We have the speakers on this webinar itself are calling in from 3 different time zones. We got Bruce from Denver, Colorado. Welcome, Bruce. And we're just going to give it just another minute or so before we will be going live with Nils and Mercer. Oh, we have Quebec City logging in. Welcome. I don't think we have your time zone accounted for in the speakers. So you're I don't even know what time it is for you out there. Amazing. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and add our speakers here so you'll get to see our shining faces. All right, so welcome to everyone who just got the notification. I'm Victoria with Bridgeline Digital, and I'll be moderating this wonderful conversation on GA4. We got Nils here from WooRank and Mercer from Measurement Marketing, and I'm going to go ahead and have you guys just tell us a little bit about what you do at your company, what your company does, and where you are logging in from as well. Nils, why don't you take it away?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Nils from WooRank, based currently in Brussels, Belgium. So I co-founded WooRank, CTO of WooRank still. So very much involved in the product side of things and translating technical capabilities into our tool. And in the context of the webinar today, like very active on getting Google Analytics 4 now implemented into our platform, and then bringing it into the product itself in a meaningful way. Because we'll obviously go into that today, but there's no simple one-to-one migration or mapping from Universal Analytics into GA4. So that poses opportunities, but also from a product point of view, makes it a little harder for us to implement that into our product. It has to make sense. Like WooRank always tries to make things simple, so it's not just dumping graphs that you can find in GA4 just into our tool. We're trying to bring it in a simplified way, an actionable way to our users. So that's what I'm mostly spending my time on these days.
Love it. And Mercer. And just for the sake of this conversation, it is Mercer that we are referring to.
Normally that's how I introduce myself. Well, it's Chris Mercer, but everybody calls me Mercer. You should too. But that is true. I do go by Mercer. So thank you for that. So I'm one of the instructors over at measurementmarketing.io, which is obviously the company that we are representing. And our job is just to help marketers, marketing teams, and agencies figure out how to use measurement to actually improve their marketing results. Most companies don't have a proper strategy for it. So we start with strategy first. And then we, of course, teach the tools like Google Analytics 4, which we'll be talking about today, as well as a little bit of strategy to help people get started. But also we teach like Tag Manager, Looker Studio, all that sort of stuff as well.
I love it. And that's a perfect transition because for those of you who are logging in just now, we got all of your registrations and a lot of you gave us questions, which we will be getting to in just a minute. But we did want to spend a chunk of time with Mercer going through the more strategic side of this. So I'm going to hand this over to you. We're going to go through some measurement strategy. There we go.
Excellent.
All right.
All right. So that is kind of the reason we're starting with this is because of this. Most individuals jump into a platform like especially one like GA4, and you just feel like you just got kicked right off that horse, and you get back on the horse again, you get kicked off again, and finally you're like, this is realist. What am I doing this for? So what we're going to talk about today, I want to focus on having you get one thing, and I would love to see these in the comments as you get them. So just sort of like hashtag one thing, and then what your one thing is. The reason we focus on one thing is because this stuff is complicated. There's a lot of moving bells and whistles, as Nils had mentioned. So to try to handle everything and to jump on and be an expert at all things is going to be next to impossible, and it's just going to end up with you being frustrated and overwhelmed all the time. So when you're learning anything like this training, whether it's a strategy style tip or more of the implementation or tactical side that we talk about later, just put in your hashtag one thing and you focus on that skill, build that one thing, and you come back, rewatch this, you pick up another new one thing. And that's how you slowly improve your skills over time, but you stably do it, right? You do it stable skills over time without getting overwhelmed and frustrated. So we're going to talk about first a mindset when it comes to measurement. This is where most companies start off incorrectly. So we're going to help everybody get that corrected. We're then going to go into a framework, which is where a lot of the strategy is when it comes to measurement. So we're going to share that with you so you'll have that. And then, of course, we're going to talk about why Google's even doing this thing with GA4. And we'll be call it the superstorm. And then we'll move into a quick tour of GA4, and then that'll push us right into the AMA. We'll be able to explore more parts of Google Analytics 4 at that point. So my origin story is really, I started teaching WordPress years and years ago, a little over a decade ago at this point. And that moved into building WordPress sites, which eventually moved into CRO, which stands for conversion rate optimization. Now, the reason that we moved into CRO is because we were delivering these WordPress sites and we wanted to be able to differentiate ourselves. So it was like, oh, we'll build a WordPress site, but then we're going to optimize the WordPress site for you. And of course, that's conversion rate optimization. Now, in order to optimize something, you must first measure things. And of course, that is where the rest is history, because we went into measurement, sort of. And really, the aha moment for me wasn't that it wasn't about the tools themselves. We got really caught up in that, teaching Google Analytics or Tag Manager, or at the time, Data Studio, or any of the other platforms around, or how to use spreadsheets to improve your measurement, blah, blah, blah. But it wasn't about the tools. The aha moment for us was when we realized the mindset is off. This is why we were so good at this stuff where others weren't. They weren't able to get the same results from the platforms. Even though we're both using Google Analytics, we're able to get more from it because we have a different mindset about it. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. I'm going to give you a couple of different examples to think about that hopefully you start to integrate into your own organization, because it will help you to get more from this tool. So if you're looking at this photo, right, you just kind of think about what's going on here. And the short answer is it's a conversation. It's pretty simple. Just one person talking to another. Same thing here. Just one person talking to another. But when you think about what a conversation is, it's really two things. One person ideally is listening. The other person is then responding. Right. And so that's what you're doing. It's a series of listening and responding. I'm going to adjust what I say based upon what Victoria says and vice versa. Right. Listening and responding. Now, this particular photo, what's unique about this one? This one's hopefully a little bit closer to home for most people, most marketers that are in the room for sure, because this is a conversation still, a series of listening and responding, but it's happening for the point of a transaction, right? In this case, it's somebody's trying to improve, let's say they're golfing and they want to pick up a new driver. And so this salesperson is asking the questions, they're putting it in the hands of the customer so they can try it out, hopefully get them to purchase, right? So it's a conversation with the goal of a transaction or a purchase. Just listening and responding though. That's all it is. It's one person's listening and then responding based on what they hear. What about this one? Now, this is a little trickier, but I promise you there is a conversation happening here too. Only now you can't be there. The salesperson can't be there. The website is. But she is having a very real conversation with the site. In fact, if you go to any website after this call, this training, you're probably going to go and experience the website and you're going to hear the copy. You're going to hear yourself reading the website too. There's definitely a conversation happening between the website and the user. Still listening and responding. Technically, that's still happening. There is still listening and responding. But here's the problem. How do we as marketers listen? Because we can't be there, right? As a human, you can't be in front of them. So how do you do that? Well, we do that through measurement. Measurement is how we listen to their side of the conversation. It is the only reason to measure anything, is to understand their side of the conversation of what's going on. Now, how do we respond, right? We know that measurement is listening. Well, how do you respond? Well, that's what we all do for a living, marketing, right? Marketing is how we respond. We adjust targeting, or we change the headline or the offers or whatever the thing is that we need to do in order to keep the conversation going in the direction that we know. But if you go back to this photo and we think about it, what most people have set up on their website is very basic measurement, very basic, right? And so because you have very little measurement on your site, at least done properly, and you'll see that as I talk about the strategy coming up here, because that's very little measurement, it's basically very little listening going on. You can't really understand their side of the conversation. You can't get much from it. So, well, that means, well, how do we adjust the marketing side? Well, we still need to market. So you have that goes overdrive. We don't really know what they're saying. We don't know their side of the conversation. So we're going to do a whole lot of marketing. In other words, we're going to keep responding over and over and over again until we get it right. But if you don't know their side of the conversation and you keep marketing, if you're not listening and you're only responding, well, how do you do that? How's that even possible? You have to guess. You have to constantly guess and try new things, or pick up the latest technique you learned from a training or from a mastermind group or from some blog post you saw or some news article, right? And so this is where most marketers are. They end up guessing an awful lot, and they don't really have to. Measurement can save a lot of that. So we're going to talk about that. And of course, that is where our company name comes from. Measurementmarketing.io is this concept of teaching how to listen to their side of the conversation, and then obviously to improve the marketing. In other words, how we respond to keep the conversation going. So when we think about this, hopefully you think about that and realize that on your site is definitely a conversation happening. How well are you listening to their side of the conversation? Because that will guide your response. In other words, your marketing when done properly. So at this point, hopefully that was the one thing for many of you, just like, wow, there's a conversation happening. Most of our students start having that conversation inside their companies where they start talking about what's the conversation. We certainly do. In our own organization, we talk constantly about what's the conversation with the offer page, what's the cart page, what conversation is the cart page having, is the thank you page having the conversation, is the blog post having the conversation it's supposed to. So we use measurement to see if the conversation's going the right way, and then of course use marketing to constantly improve it. Now, the other thing that I wanted to briefly mention here is this concept of tool versus trade. And this definitely comes into play with tools like Google Analytics 4, but also other tools like Wicked Reports or Hyros or any other platform that's out there that's been created. This is sort of how I think about it. If you know how to boil an egg, but that's all you know how to do, right? You can boil an egg on a camper stove, you can boil it on your kitchen stove, but you're like, man, I just wish I had more than eggs. I want more than just hard-boiled eggs. I want to be a chef. And so then you start watching these TV shows, right? And you're looking at the Food Network or whatever the different TV shows are, and you're seeing all these fancy chefs. But what you notice is the kitchen. And you're like, wow, look at all those cool tools they have. Look at that stove. If I had a stove like that, I could cook. If I had a little bread proofer like they do, I could cook. If I had a sink like they do, I could cook. So you run out and you buy all the fancy new tools. This happens all the time in marketing teams. They buy all these fancy new tools, and then they take these fancy new tools and they boil an egg because that's all they know how to do. And there's a challenge with just learning how to, just getting a stove doesn't make you a chef, right? You need to learn how to be a chef, and then you learn how to use the stove as a chef does. It's the same thing with measurement. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about a strategy of how you can learn measurement. And we're going to give you this framework because this will teach it to you. And you can go through this over and over again. Every time you go through it, you're going to get a little bit more measurement muscle, and you get a little bit better at learning measurement, or in the case of that egg example, becoming a chef. So let's talk about the framework itself. There really are 3 simple steps to execute in this when it comes to measurement. We have to plan out our measurement system, we build out our measurement system, and then we launch it. In other words, we actually use it. But how we do this is very, very important. And that is where the secret sauce is. So I'm going to give you all of that stuff. We're going to walk through this step by step. At the end, I'll let you know when the slide's ready. You can just take a picture of it or something if you want, so that you can have it and implement it. But the reason that this was created is because most marketers are marketing in the blind. Again, we talk about this. They're doing lots of guessing, but that's because they don't know what else to do and they need action. They got to try to improve results. And so you're going to guess, like that's all you can do, right? So we're marketing in the blind. We're trying to get to a point where just going through a system by just using measurement properly, it sort of automatically spits out additional revenue and results. That's the idea, right? So as a symptom of using this process, in other words, as a symptom of going through these activities, we get the result we really want, which is, of course, better results in terms of revenue and profits. Now, how do we do this? First, we focus on the plan. There's 3 main keys to this step. That is, and I kind of think about these like listing in 3 columns when I do it. So the first one will be listing all the questions I'm trying to answer, what we call results and how questions. So not only what the results are of the customer journey that we're trying to measure for, but how are we getting that result, right? So we're asking lots of different questions around that. Then we make sure to list out all of the information we're going to need to collect in order to get answers to those questions. Now, a lot of times, a lot of organizations have something similar to this already in place. This next key, though, is everything. This is the thing that people don't do. Actions. So before you open up Google Analytics 4, before you open up that spreadsheet, before you look at a Looker Studio report or anything else that you've got going on in your organization, you think about what actions will we take based upon the answers we're about to get. And you literally plan that out, plan out the actions ahead of time. So if your question is around an opt-in rate, you obviously need to collect the page views of the opt-in offer itself, maybe the thank you page, so you can figure out what that conversion rate is. And then what actions will you take? Well, if it's less than 30%, we're going to do this. If it's between 30 and 40%, we're going to do this other thing. If it's higher than 50%, we're going to do yet this other thing, right? And so you sort of think through what those actions are. Now, with that plan in place, you then move into your build. And your build is where tools like GA4 definitely come into play. You got to make sure that that platform understands what results you're trying to get. So you set up that term. In this case, it's called conversion events in GA4. And so it understands what you're trying to do, what you're trying to measure for. Then you make sure it understands the traffic. Those of you familiar with Google Analytics probably know about UTM codes already, but there is a certain way to set those up and structure them. But the idea is that you're identifying, the platform can identify where the traffic came from, who it was, what type of traffic it was, what the point of the traffic was, that sort of stuff. Then we move on to the story. Now, this is what we call a setup. So the whole idea behind this is when you understand how to use the tool and the different parts and pieces of the tool, some of which we will be able to talk about today, just using Google Analytics 4, you should already start to see a natural story appear between which traffic sources are causing which results. It should naturally start to happen. And if anyone's ever had that experience where you're like, I've been in Google Analytics before, it's like the Matrix. I feel like I'm in the Matrix, that movie, and I have to decode the Matrix to figure this thing out. That is because there was no plan that was properly put into place first. So the build was not done correctly. So of course it's chaotic reports, right? That's what's going to happen. So once you've got your build in place, then we move into launching it. Of course, we're going to listen. What are we listening for? The conversation, right? We're listening to the conversation between the users and the website, specifically individual steps of that site, so we can see where the conversation is going the way we want it to and maybe where it's not, right? That's the idea. We just look for those trends and patterns. Once we've got our basic trends and patterns, we start to forecast. This, by the way, is the other thing that companies don't do. It's a huge miss. Most companies are obsessed with forensically going back into the past and trying to decipher what happened to the $10,000 they spent last week, when in reality, they should be focused very much on the future and talking about what's going to happen to the $10,000 they're about to spend next week. And so when they properly measure, you can do this and you can forecast and say, okay, well, here's what we're going to spend, let's say on Facebook or Google Ads or whatever it is. Here's what the clicks are going to be. Here's what the CPM should be. Here's what my conversion rate is going to be. Here's how much I'm going to close at what average ticket to create the revenue amount that I want. And you sort of measure against your forecasts. Now, when you measure against your forecast, you hit what everybody's trying to do, which is optimize. And this is the problem with most organizations, is they just race to this optimization step, but they had no plan. They had a very poor build, and they're not particularly using what they've got back there properly. So they end up just guessing over and over again for this optimization. That's what we should optimize. But if you're measuring against your forecasts, you see exactly where that conversation turns south. And now you know where to focus your limited marketing resources so that you can improve that particular step. A popular question is like, we just need to know what lever to pull or what's the thing that's going to move the needle the most. Going through this framework will actually do that. So that is, in short, the measurement marketing framework that we teach, and you're more than welcome to take this. Now, roughly when you're first starting, when you're first starting out, I would say about 90 days, give yourself to practice this. You're going to get kind of rough in the beginning because it's a new skill like everything else is, but eventually you get better and better and better at it, right? So give yourself at least 90 days to get through it and practice it a few times. Some tips: if you are in your organization, you really have no idea what questions you should be asking or what you would even do with the answers, that sort of stuff, you absolutely have to focus on your plan. That's a symptom of a proper plan that's not being put in place. So go through these planning steps. When you do that, you should have a clear roadmap of what you're going to measure and why, and specifically what you're going to do with it once you have it, right? All of that's in place. Then you move into your build. Now, if you have a poor build, this is where you have reports that basically a bunch of data, maybe you have a lot of information, but you have no story, you have no action. And if your organization has that problem, which most do, where they got a bunch of data, no real action. Nobody really knows what to do with it. That's chaotic reports. That's because the build went wrong. So if the build is going wrong, you focus on the results, the traffic, and then learning to use the tools to do what we call a proper setup. And then at that point, you will actually have useful reports that naturally tell you a story. And that is absolutely possible in a platform like GA4 to sort of have it naturally reveal to you what's going on, right? That conversation between the users and the website. Now, if you find in your team, you have this problem of, I think Dan Kennedy coined this term years ago, but this random acts of marketing, right? Basically just guessing over and over again, or using that hippo, right? The highest paid person on what should be done. That's just random acts of marketing, which is fine because sometimes it's going to work, but it's a lot of effort to do that. So the random acts of marketing, you focus on that launching step where we listen, we forecast, and we optimize. And eventually you're going to know exactly what's coming up next and then what you're going to do based upon the measurements that come back. So at this point, this slide is finished. You can definitely take a screenshot if you want it. But this is the measurement marketing framework. Go through this over and over and over again. I cannot emphasize this is enough. The only difference between where you are now and where we are is that we are probably thousands of revolutions through this framework. Right. So we've a little bit more measurement muscle than you probably do right now because we've just gone through this over and over and over again. But the more that you do it, just to emphasize, we're exactly where you are now when we first did this stuff. Right. So just practice this over and over again and it gets better and better for you. Now, very briefly, before we go into a tour of GA4, I want to talk about why GA4, because this is huge. We are in a superstorm right now as marketers. There's really three big storms that are colliding into this one. First one is tech. That's things like the browsers changing, iOS and Apple having their TIFF in 2021, all that sort of stuff, or 2020, I guess it was now. You've got the laws that have coming out, GDPR, which is basically dramatically changing who controls the data and who owns the data. It used to be Facebook owned all your data, but now the users own all their data. And Facebook, they just sort of lease it to Facebook. That sort of stuff is changing. Then you've got users themselves, which of course is the storm that kicked off the other two because marketers ignored them. And so now users are putting in ad blockers. Now users are using different technology like Brave or Vivaldi or any of these other DuckDuckGo's got a browser now that keeps people from being measured. All of this means every day less people can be measured. They're still on our sites. They're still interacting. They're still purchasing. They're still opting in, but we don't know they're doing that because we won't be able to measure them. So you got to deal with this sort of new world, this superstorm, where every day it's harder to measure and you're not going to be able to in a lot of cases. And we're here. We're in the middle of this, trying to figure this stuff out. So the way through this, way to get through the storm, measurement is a department now. It's not a project. It used to be people would think, oh, I'm just going to set up my goals in Google Analytics. And once I've done that, then I'm off to the races. It is not a thing anymore. There are way too many tools that are out there. Measurement is a department in an organization. Typically, it's a department that's attached to marketing because it can really sort of, it's like a turbocharger for your marketing team. You have proper measurement. So first step, if you haven't thought about that, definitely consider that. Building measurement muscle, we talked about before. That's what the framework will show you to do. And you will naturally build measurement muscle. You have to build skills. Remember, we're not talking about using the tools, right? That's like going to the chef and saying, or going to the person who wants to be a chef and saying, I'm going to show you how to cut vegetables and slice and dice, but that still doesn't make them a chef. That just teaches them how to cut. So don't worry about the tools. Focus on the strategy. That's what builds your muscle, right? That framework will help that. Now you need to use tools that give you control of the data because with these superstorms, one of them being laws, you need to be able to control how things go in and how things come out, which of course GA4 does. And then we talked about this earlier in that framework, but this concept of results and how most organizations are measuring for results. And by that, I mean number of leads that they get, number of sales they make, average ticket, average cart value, that sort of stuff. But they have very little clue of how things are working. And that's a problem because you might not care while you're making a bunch of money. But the second things stop working, I absolutely guarantee you will care. You're going to look around your team and say, what broke? And no one will know because no one knows how you were successful in the first place. That's why you must know results and how. Now, the improved tools, that basically brings us to Universal GA4 because that's what Google's doing to improve our situation. This is essentially universal. This is what it's been. It's built on an old platform made for a very different time, and especially in internet times. So when Universal came out, there was no devices. We just had desktops, barely those, right? I mean, barely laptops were around. It wasn't on mobile phones. There certainly wasn't your Nest thermostat that was part of the internet. Like none of this stuff existed. And if you think about this particular picture, one of my favorites about this is at a certain point, you just can't upgrade on an old platform. Imagine this car and be like, well, maybe we could get that wheel fixed. but I also want airbags, and I want a cool stereo, and I want GPS. I want anti-lock brakes. How do I do all of that with a car like this? And the answer is you can't. This platform cannot do what is now required. So what do? Well, if you're Google, you have the ability to completely rebuild it, which is what they did with GA4. So this is where GA4, I was thinking about that Back to the Future quote where it was like, roads where we're going, we don't need roads. But that's kind of what you see here. You got this pickup truck that's really outfitted with a lot of fancy stuff, not all of it that you're going to need, but some of it you might from time to time in order to navigate through the new world where there aren't the roads that we used to have before. We have to sort of figure stuff out. And that's what GA4 allows us to do. So it's built to survive the future, right? And in the fact that we got a bunch of devices, this is our future, and it's just going to get worse. It's not going to get better. And so just to emphasize that point, this is not like, oh, hunker down for a year, it'll all go away. It's not. It's going to get worse. You're going to be measuring less people a year from now and 5 years from now and 10 years from now than you are now. But we just have to get used to this world. So the basics of GA4, and this is where I'm going to flip into my screen share here so you can kind of take a look at what this does and what it looks like. One of the biggest reasons that it does, I'm going to start with some of the behind the scenes stuff, and then we'll go more into when we go in the AMA. Data streams, right? This is huge, the way that this is organized. If you can set up a stream for your organization coming in, and you can do different types of streams. So you can have a web stream for your website. And if you have an app, like an iOS app, an Android app, in the before days with Universal Analytics, you used to have to do those as completely separate properties, and you really couldn't see the crisscross between devices. Now you totally can. It's made for that. So you just create a new stream. Somebody recently asked about OTT, which is like the video stuff that's on Roku and things like that. Well, those apps could, in theory, have their own data stream that you could push into GA4, and you can measure how people are interacting with videos. I mean, there's a lot of cool things you can do with it as it goes through. Now, the other thing that's particularly useful is when it comes to users themselves. So if we go into the reporting identity, this is where Google Analytics 4 is starting to excel. It's, again, early days, right? Everything's kind of new, everybody, so everyone's figuring it out. But this is where you can do the old way, which is device-based. That was Universal Analytics. Or you can do kind of the new way of them doing stuff, which is, hey, we're going to try to use user ID, or we're going to use the information that maybe we know as Google about the users, or we'll use the cookies that are on the devices. And eventually we will start modeling and sort of guesstimating how things are actually probably going. This modeling word is going to be huge in the future, because in order to measure what is unmeasurable, you have to model what your users are doing to get those trends and patterns, right? So Google's really pushing toward this, and this platform is built from the start to do this with AI machine learning. So there's lots of really cool things that this can do. Now, I'm going to scroll through just very quickly kind of a top level of the platform itself, then we'll dive into the AMA, so we've got plenty of time for questions. So basically, they're organized what they call workspaces. You've got these reports, you've got explorations, which is for deeper dive analysis. You've got your advertising reports, and then you've got configuration options here. For the most part, we're going to stick with reports. I'll talk a little bit about explorations and get a little down the deep end a little bit. But when you have your reports, the Universal Analytics versus GA4, you're going to notice there's not that many reports back here. I think with time, that's going to change. There's some new features they're doing. There's something called the library that we'll talk about, where you can kind of customize some of your own. And I would expect that more reports are going to be coming down. But for now, they sort of have these life cycle reports. That's what everybody's got access to, are these. And you have acquisition reports, which are essentially answering the question, how did people find us, right? Where did our users come from? Then you've got engagement, which is what activities are those users actually taking. And then you've got monetization, which is all about what are the results of those activities. So that's kind of the life cycle that Google Analytics did. And you'll notice a lot fewer reports than what Universal has. Universal has a bunch, but not so much with GA4. So those are how they're organized. Now, for those of you answering questions around who our users are, that's still here. It's under the user reports. So I'm going to minimize our life cycle here. There's our user reports where we can get some demographic information, gender and age, that sort of stuff. And then tech. This is where you learn device type or what browser they're using, that sort of stuff, if that is something that you're measuring for. So that's what it sort of does out of the box on its own. You then have explorations. Explorations are pretty cool. I just want to show some of these. So you can do a freeform report. These are definitely wonky, so we'll talk more about these later if people have questions about them. But this is the ability to sort of, in Universal, you had custom reports. In GA4, it's all explorations. So this is where you would create kind of a custom table. Those of you familiar with spreadsheets, kind of like a pivot table, very similar to the reports that were in Google Analytics the Universal Analytics edition. So you'll have that. The other things that you can do, this is one of my favorites, is the funnel exploration. This is literally where you can create funnels. Talk about an upgrade. GA4 knocked it out of the park when it comes to this, because Universal, when you had a funnel going on, you really couldn't do much with it. If you forgot to set it up, you would have to set up a goal funnel, and then you sort of have to wait for traffic to come through for it to do its thing. Not anymore, not with GA4. So now you go through, you can set up your different steps that you want to look for, and then it'll spit out a funnel. And if you want to try different steps from something that happened last week, you could build those steps and it'll spit out the new funnel of what happened last week. It's really cool what you can do with this, a super, super upgrade. Now, in addition to those, you've got path exploration, which sort of explores what people did at what step. You can kind of go forward or backward on that, which is nice. You've got device overlap, or excuse me, these overlap reports, where you could do something like how many people were both mobile and desktop, right, to access our site, that sort of stuff. You got cohorts, if you're, for those of you looking at measuring groups across time, the user lifetime value for trends and patterns, you know, if that's going up or down. So you've got some pretty cool things that you can do with the explorations. In the advertising section, this is really more about attribution. So those of you familiar with Universal Analytics, the multi-touch funnels, which was very often not used, which was a shame, because they're pretty cool. You can do these little pathing reports, and you can kind of see which channels or which source mediums people are using to actually cause the results that you're looking for. And that's kind of what this does. So a lot of attribution stuff. And then configuration is where you essentially set everything up. Now, I'm going to give you one thing, and then I'm going to go into the AMA. And this is because it's more of an SEO style audience with WooRank. I wanted to talk about something that everybody must set up. I do not know why Google has chosen to do it like this, but I want to emphasize this is what you need to do when you have search, right? So you have to have Search Console. You still link it into your Google Analytics 4, just like you did with Universal Analytics. So you're going to link it to Google Analytics 4. Your Search Console links. It's kind of rules as Universal. As long as you have the account, it's the same email, and both the email on GA on the Google Analytics 4 side and on the Search Console side, as long as they have permissions, you will see the ability to link. So that's what that is, right? So you get this all linked. When you do that, and this is the important step, I'm going to go into, this is our production. So you can see in our setup, we've got lifecycle reports and we've got these Search Console reports. For whatever reason, Google has decided you have to first link your account to Search Console, then you must activate these reports. So many of you might not have these, even if you've got Search Console linked. So I wanted to show you very quickly in the library, and then we'll move on to AMA, how this works. So in the library, you can create your own reports. You can create your own layouts of reports. It's really the best way to think about it. And one of those reports, if I scroll over here, it kind of gets buried sometimes, but you'll see Search Console. Now, you will not see this here if you do not have Search Console linked. So you have to have it linked. But once you have it linked, it'll show up here. And then all you do is publish it. So you can go over here and it'll say publish instead. Little hamburger menu, the 3 dots menu does that. When you publish, it shows up here. And then you have something that's similar to what Universal Analytics did. So you can have the queries, all the different queries that people are typing in to look for you, and kind of the basic metrics around that, all coming from Search Console. And then you've got essentially what is a landing page report that's filtered for just organic traffic, specifically for Google organic, since it's coming from Google. So you can see, again, the landing page that search traffic is generating and the results from those pages. So there's a couple of reports that are back there waiting for you, but you do have to publish them. And Google doesn't really do a great job of letting people know that. So I wanted to make sure that that was there. I hope with time they change that. But that was a huge pro tip, I know, for me when I learned about it. Now, we do have the Measurement Marketing Academy. I just want to say that is our flagship product. So if you hear me mention that, we use that to obviously kind of a DIY platform to learn how to do all this stuff. But we do have a free set of tools as well. You'll see this a little bit later on. A couple of reasons I wanted this now. One is if you go to measurementmarketing.io/WooRank, you will, or you just use the QR code, you will see this in the URL. When it loads, you're going to see a bunch of little UTMs. That will show you how we are measuring the performance of this talk right now, so that we can see people coming to our site and what they're doing there. So that's why I wanted to mention that. So there's also additional training that we have on the YouTube channel. If you want, I'll reference some of those for some of the AMAs for sure. And then my email, just want to make sure everybody had that as well. So if you have questions after this, I'm able to help out too. Just reference that it was the WooRank seminar that you did, and then I'll be able to help out. And with that, I'll hand it over to you, Victoria, for our A's.
All right. And for those of you who are getting this in an on-demand way, we might have to slow down the speed because I know we gave you a very small time to cover so much content. Thank you so much for covering all that. I know it was a lot. So I think this will be one of those pieces of content that will be even better in an on-demand fashion because you could pause it and actually, pull up your own screen, start following along, doing the GA4, setting up the reports yourself. So doing all of those screen shares, incredibly useful. And also doing some initial strategy setup. So I think that was perfect. So for those of you who did send in questions, during your registration, we wanted to give some time to quickly go through and do as many as we can with the remaining half hour-ish of our time here. So I'm just going to start flipping through. And then I know, Mercer, you had some screen sharing that you wanted to do to answer some of these, showing it, live within the GA4 setup. So this first question, why does GA4 not match universal analytics? And for the sake of our AMA here, I'll be saying UA or GA3, we're essentially saying the same thing, what was before. So why does GA4 not match UA or GA3?
The short answer to that is that they're just completely different platforms built for completely different purposes. So they literally define sessions differently. They define users different. Everything's defined differently. They're never going to match. So don't try it. Instead, what you look for is the trends and patterns because they should match. So if you look at Universal Analytics and it says you have 100 users and GA4 says you have 70 users, I could care less. I really could. I don't care because that's just a snapshot in time. If Universal, let's say a week later, says I now have 200 users, then I would expect GA4 is going to say roughly I've got 150 or 140 users. In other words, both of them are saying your users doubled, and that's what I pay attention to. So you look for the trends and patterns, and that's where you see the truth. We have a saying here: the truth is in the trend, the power is in the pattern, and that's what you look for to find that. So they just are completely different platforms. So that's why they're never going to match.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I mean, we're just going to try and rapid fire through some of these, but, and Nils, jump in at any point, but what are the differences between UA and GA4 in measuring sessions and setting goals? And I think some of this you've already covered in that initial tour.
Yeah, I can share it just briefly.
Sure, yeah.
So the big thing is sessions is it's just sessions are kind of the same in terms of, there's a 30-minute timeout and all that sort of stuff. You can adjust it obviously still in Universal as you could with GA4. So you can still adjust that timeout setting. So the real difference is that goals word. In Universal Analytics, they have goals. In GA4, there are no goals. They instead have conversion events. Now, GA4 is a very different platform. Everything's an event. And obviously, we can't use this very limited time together to make you an expert in this platform. But think about it like every behavior that happens is measured. You determine what the event is, and then you determine parameters that describe that event. And you push all of those into GA4, right? So that's kind of what this is for. So here's all of the different events that this particular demo account has in it. Then there are conversions. That is your goals now. So again, they don't call them goals. They are called conversion events, but it's essentially the same thing. So you can see here, these of all those events you just saw, these are the specific ones that are set up to be measured as conversions. So if I go back to our platform, so I'm going to go back into, and the reason I'm showing you ours at measurementmarketing.io is because we own it, so you can see it lit up. So we can see here's our events, and you can see here's all the different events that we are measuring for, the different behaviors that we're measuring for. These ones in blue have been marked as conversions. So we want to be able to see them in our reports as that results. When you think about the framework we talked about earlier, these are the results we are trying to get. And the secret sauce, I think, to this is measuring for stages. So we'll measure when somebody's aware of a particular journey, when they have engaged with that customer journey. We measure when they complete that customer journey. So all of these different stages that come through. And then we have different traffic sources, which are designed to move somebody through that pipeline. And we're always asking, did the traffic source do its job, right? So that's how we do it. But that's the biggest difference is conversion events. The good news is super easy to set up. With Universal Analytics, you had destination goals and event goals and pages and session goals. With GA4, you just turn it off and it's no longer being recorded as a goal. Turn it back on. It is now being recorded as a goal. Just remember, I'm saying that word goal loosely. It is now conversion event. And that's really what you should be mentioning is instead of saying goals, say conversion events from here on out.
Yeah, I think that is that's helpful. So much of this is a shift in mindset and terminology, so that conversion to goals sort of, that's a helpful terminology shift there. So this, I'm not sure if we've covered this so far, but how would you measure bounce rates?
That's a good question. So I'm going to go into the lifecycle reports and go to acquisition, which is again answering where a user is coming from. There is traffic acquisition and user acquisition. User is again a pro for GA4 is that it's measuring the original traffic source that acquired that user, right? That new user. But remember, this is GA4's perspective. So when you first set up GA4, all your old traffic sources are going to get credit for user acquisition. So this report won't be particularly useful for a while. This one, though, the traffic acquisition report, this is very similar to the source medium report in Universal Analytics. So traffic acquisition will tell us which channel you can flip it to source medium if you want, right? It's for the different visits, the sessions that are coming in. But what'll happen is you see across here, you see this engaged sessions, average engagement time, engaged sessions per user. A big difference between Universal Analytics and GA4 is Universal Analytics could not really tell time all that well. GA4 is built to tell time. It knows every single second you're on that page, which is really cool. What'll happen is this engaged sessions, this is how it measures. This is very different than Universal. Universal used to have this thing called bounce rate, where it would be say if we get a hit, meaning like a page view or as some measurable behavior, if we get a page view, let's say as a hit, and then nothing else, no other measurable information comes through, then we're going to call that a bounce. We're going to assume they weren't engaged and they bounce. In GA4, that's not the case. What they do is they use time. So they say engaged sessions. Well, how do you measure engagement? Well, by default, 10 seconds, but you can change it up to a minute. You can do that in the settings as well. So what they do is they measure for engagement and they say, oh, well, the number of sessions that were above 10 seconds are an engaged session. The opposite of that is bounce rate in GA4. So it's the same word, but it's completely different way of calculating it. So it's to some extent can be a little confusing for a lot of people because of that, but that's what it is. It's just the opposite of engaged sessions. Personally, I wouldn't use bounce rate. It's not a particularly reliable method. You should be using engaged sessions. Go after the things you want, which is to engage your users and focus on that metric, as opposed to bounce, which is the opposite of it's disengaged users. So, but that's all it is. Bounce rate is now just the opposite of engaged sessions. So.
Yeah, I think bounce rate has always been a very misunderstood kind of metric. It's often or has this tone of being very bad, and it probably in a lot of cases it is. Like if you have people coming to your site and immediately going away, that's generally not a good thing. But at the same time, if you have a website or even a page that just is there to provide information to a user, it's totally fine for that user to see one page, read it, get the information they needed, and then leave your website. So indeed, that engagement is a more positive spin on the entire idea of trying to figure out what a user is doing on your website. So yeah, as we've seen so often, and you get the sense from other questions we see, like try to really get rid of old habits when it comes to analytics, and I know it's tough. Like it's not easy to unlearn something you've been using for many years and learn something new. But what we're trying to do with these webinars is trying to get people to understand that old habits need to die, and things like bounce rate, for instance, is one of those. Like, maybe bounce rate was never a good kind of metric anyway, and it's more about looking at the people who are on your website and are spending time on your website, even if it's just on one page. Maybe that's the purpose of that page.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And they did bring back bounce rate into GA4. It was one of those things that the market was freaking out because it was so different. Everyone's looking for bounce rate because they were so used to probably miss it in Universal. So it does exist in GA4, but it's just calculated completely differently now.
Yeah, that's really a helpful distinction there. So, and thank you to the comments. We're getting a handful of questions or comments coming in as you guys are covering these. So if you do have any other questions that are popping up, feel free to add them into the comments, and we can always try and address them with the time that we have. Jumping over, which are the best reports that GA4 has to offer and why? And I think, Mercer, you may have covered this a little bit in your initial tour. Are there any others that you want to call out?
So I'll do one just to quickly share that same traffic acquisition report. The only difference is I switched it to source medium here under session source medium. This is by far my favorite report for universal, the source media report, because in one place you can get answers to so many questions, because it identifies where the traffic is coming from. It identifies quantity of that traffic in terms of users and sessions. It then identifies the engagement metrics. In other words, some of the activities, the behaviors that those users are coming from those different traffic sources. Some might be more engaged than others coming through. And then way over to the right, you see where it says conversions. These are how you measure it against goals. So obviously you have, total revenue in terms of e-commerce, if you have that set up, but this otherwise, if you want to see, like in our case, how many people engaged with the Academy funnel, I can measure for that specific behavior. And then I can tell by traffic source, which particular traffic sources are really good at engagement with the Academy customer journey. So I like this one by far. My second favorite one is the one that we talked about before, which is the funnels, the explorations. So right in the explorations thing. Fairly easy to play around with. It's one of the easier explorations to figure yourself out through. So I would recommend that one too. But first things first, set up and use traffic acquisition report, these sort of top level standard reports before you dive into the belly of the beast.
Yeah, that's great. And if I'm remembering correctly, you were saying that custom reports are now explore or exploration.
Essentially, yeah. So in the explorations, you've got your freeform reports, kind of what the old style custom reports used to be in Universal Analytics. And that's kind of what Google wanted. They wanted to have like standard reports that are kind of high level, and then people would come in and figure out the free form. Just to show kind of how these work. This column, the way to think about this is every single possible puzzle piece I'm going to want to have, if to ask questions around, right? So you sort of have to define these. Now I used a default one. I just clicked on one that was already in existence, which is why these are here. Otherwise there wouldn't be anything here. So you sort of first define all the puzzle pieces. This is the part where you assemble the puzzle pieces and say, this is the piece I want. So of all I could use city or first user medium or device category or country, anything here. I'm just using city right now because it's being broken down by city. And then this is the display. This is where the puzzle actually shows itself, right? With all those pieces assembled. So again, these are the pieces defined. Here are the pieces that you want to put together. Here's what it actually looks like. And then you can create multiple tabs. So you can come in here and create a new tab and make a funnel exploration. Then you can do a new tab and make a path exploration. So creating this and naming it something like, instead of the exploration name here, you could be like, this is, for us, like it might be the Academy funnel reports or something. And now I've got this exploration with a bunch of different reports that are wildly different styles that answer questions around how users are experiencing the Academy. In other words, what the conversation is between the Academy customer journey and the users themselves. So our marketers can come in, see this, and they go back and take action, because nobody wants to stare at numbers all day long. So we try to set it up so that you don't have to. It just sort of naturally leads to an action so you can get back to work. That's the ultimate goal.
Yeah,
I think they took inspiration from Google Data Studio there. So I think what in Universal Analytics, where you kind of already needed to know what you were looking for while building reports and adding graphs to them. This is the way more, it's called Explore for a reason, right? Like it's a way more playful way to go through your data and discover things and turn the data however you want. Click a few buttons. Maybe it's not what you expected. Go back, click a few other buttons. Like it at the same time, it teaches you to work with data, and it shows you, hopefully in the end, a good report that you were looking for. So again, one of those things. get yourself familiar with these things. Play a few times with this. It's overwhelming in the beginning. It was for me.
Was for me too. Absolutely.
Yeah. So, and the more you play, the more you get to know about your website, and you get to know more stuff than you were able to with UA, with Universal Analytics. So, Explore feature is definitely, in my opinion, a way better solution to building custom stuff than it was in UA.
Oh, that's great. So we have another one. So can you elaborate on creating an easy to read exploration report for button clicks and page scrolls? So that's sort of an extension of what we were just looking at there.
Yeah. So it depends. It depends on trying to get done, right? So like, it all goes back to, and this is so important, to that framework of the plan. What questions am I trying to answer? What information do I need to collect? What actions am I going to take? Because a lot of times people will measure for measurement's sake, meaning there is no action they can take. Even if they have the answer, they just don't know what to do with it. So it's like, well, why measure for that? So make sure it's part of the proper plan. Then you might come in and you can create a funnel report, right? Where you could say, I'm not going to do this entirely here because I don't know what this account has in it, but let's say I wanted to create an event, right? So I can go through here and I can select, you see where it says events. So these are all the different events that this particular GA4 account has. I could say, well, I want to see clicks, people who click. And then I could say, well, click on what? So that might be where I have like a link URL coming through, and the link URL has to contain something. In other words, they were clicking on the button that went here. And so that's where you can define really specific steps and then say, then I want them followed by another event, another behavior that I've measured. And maybe that could be a purchase event, right? So I want to know people that clicked to go to the cart and then purchased from after the cart, right? Something along those lines. And then you would build out the funnel as it stands. Right now, I'm just doing click and then purchase. But when I do that, it's probably just like only 2 users. Not going to see too much here. But you get the idea, right? Where it's like, here's step 1, here's step 2. So it's really just defining the steps, but very important. It's not to see what you can see. If you're doing that, if you're like, oh, it'd be interesting to know, like that's a poisonous phrase in my head. Nothing, I don't care if it's interesting. I want it to be useful. So make sure you've got your plans in place, and it makes it a little bit easier. Incidentally, just very quickly, for those that are wondering about the bounce rate thing, if you go into your metrics with these reports, you'll see that's where bounce rate is right there. So you've got access to bounce rate as well. So anything that you've heard where it's like, well, I don't see that in the standard reports, the explorations have access to a whole other subset of information, which is why they are so much more powerful. But they take longer to get through, but they can do more.
All right. Okay, so we're going to jump over to, this one's a little bit more specific. So maybe we could start with WordPress and extend it out a little bit, but how do you set up GA4 with a WordPress or maybe some other platform site?
So good question. So I'm going to share on mine really quickly here. So this is in the data stream where you set up your data stream. I'm using one just for the web right now. So when you go down into your data stream, you will go to view tag instructions. This will happen once you set up anyway. It'll automatically do this. It'll actually tell you right down here different ways to set up for different top platforms. Depending upon your skill set, I'm a big fan of get good enough to get going, make it better later. So if you want to use Monster Insights for GA4, use Monster Insights for GA4 for your WordPress site. If you want, you can click where it says install. You can literally copy this code and you can put it in your WordPress theme or edit your themes if you want. So there's multiple ways to get this done. That's kind of the beauty of it. But again, good enough to get going. So if you just want to use a plugin because it's easy, no problem. Use the plugin. The thing they're going to ask you for is this, the measurement ID, which is why it has a little copy feature here, because Google knows you're going to need this over and over again. So use this measurement ID. That's what identifies the stream. So in Universal Analytics, you had like UA dash and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 -9 or something like that. In GA4, it's all measurement IDs. So you grab the measurement ID, plug it into a plugin, and then it pops GA4 on your WordPress site. You're off to the races. Other ways to do it would be Tag Manager, which is kind of what we recommend ultimately when people are ready for it. But again, good enough to get going, come back and make it better later. Otherwise, you'll end up spinning your wheels with this thing forever and have no real productive information coming from it because you're too busy being in the machine, and you got to get progress. So plugins are fine to start with.
All right. So I know that was a specific question we got from a registrant about WordPress, but I think, that kind of answers the question.
Yeah.
So, and again, we're going to use the terms UA and GA3 interchangeably. But do you need two codes to run both GA4 and UA?
Yep.
Yeah, technically. So I'm going to say yes and no, because it depends how you have analytics set up. If you have a legacy installation of Universal Analytics, you could very well need to keep that code on your pages. Which, just to show what I'm talking about, in your data streams, and this was years ago, 2 years ago, Universal started doing this. So if I go back into my tagging instructions, I'm just going to look for the tag. This stuff is called this GTag script, right? And this is what you're looking for. Technically, if you've got the Universal Analytics GTag script, you can connect it to GA4. Personally, I hate that idea because most people did not set up Universal incorrect at all. So they're just going to copy over all their errors into a platform that's already more complex, and it's going to set them back. So I don't personally recommend it. However, you could, right? This GTag script, if you have this on your page, you can connect so that the one, and this is what Google's called Google Tag. They're trying to unify everything together. Some of you don't have a script that looks like this because it was set up so long ago that it doesn't look like this. It doesn't say gtag.js or anything. It says analytics.js. That code is completely separate and will only do Universal, nothing else. And so you would have to have a separate script for GA4 if that's the case. So it really does depend upon what you've got set up. If you're using Tag Manager, it's just a different tag. And which is why we recommend Tag Manager for most measurement setups, because it doesn't matter. Tag Manager does all the heavy lifting for you. So that's how I would personally answer it. It's kind of like, it depends upon where you've got set up right now.
I love that none of these answers are a real clear, straight yes or no. There does seem like there's a little bit of gray and so many different instances on how to answer these questions. But
that's a pro. That's not a bug. That's a feature. Right. And the reason is to get through the storm, right? Because somebody in Europe has got very different privacy concerns than somebody in the US currently does. Mm-hmm. And then in the US, we're going to be very different in 5 years, right? We're also going to have all that stuff probably happen. So we'll have to adjust our measurement, and you need a platform that can wiggle around all the curves. But that means everything's got to be customized, kind of. And that's why the platform is built like that. So that's to Niels's point. That's why it takes so long to get used to it. And don't expect you're going to come in here and in a week you're the expert. It'll be about 90 days of you getting kicked around by it is what's going to happen. But expect that. Be like, hey, for 90 days, I'm just going to figure out kind of where the bathrooms are virtually here, right? Kind of figure out where things are, while the bells and whistles are. Then you get better at it. Then you get even better at it. Then you get even better at it. So it does take time to learn.
Gets worse before it gets better.
That's right. And important to do that now before the sunset happens. Yeah,
exactly. Because we didn't mention this, but this does end in currently July 1st for the free accounts. So I doubt they'll push that back.
Well, you did touch on this very briefly, but how does GA4 handle data privacy and consent?
So GA4 will model data, right? So meaning it's going to measure what it thinks is happening, right? And it's going to measure what it actually can. It's going to then model what it thinks is happening based on the stuff that it can't measure. So there are some consent policies. Again, if you get specific to the code, you might have to do that depending upon the size of your organization. But actually, if you're using Tag Manager is controlling all of that stuff. When it comes to GA4, though, there's a couple you can do. If I want to share screens very quickly here.
Yeah.
So Google Signals, they're working on this right now. I don't think this is fully cooked, but the concept is good in that you can allow Google to anonymously share with your GA4 what they know of the users. Because even though somebody might not be logged into your site, so you can't measure with a user ID or something, they probably are logged into Gmail or Google Maps or something else on their phone, on their laptop, on their work computer. And Google knows that they are the person they are, right? So Google knows they're using different devices, and they can kind of push some of that information into GA4. So even though your setup might not have measured them, Google certainly is, because they're using Chrome. They're using, there's a million different ways Google measures stuff. So they have information, and that's sort of what gets connected into GA4 so it can feed that model. And then it gets better and better at modeling. Modeling is not an instant thing. It takes time. And the more data you have, the better the models are going to be. So they take some time to learn. But Google Signals is one of those things you can certainly set up. If and when you need to get rid of information, you can do retention policies depending on what you need there. And then you can also do data deletion. So if somebody in GDPR sends a request and says, delete all my data, you can come in, you can get data out of GA4 based upon how you put it in. But that's part of the beauty of GA4. With Universal, this was basically impossible, which is why Google's got to shut it down because you can't get the data really out. But with GA4, it's made to be flexible where it's like, today you've got it, but tomorrow you may not. So just a few things there.
Yeah, absolutely. So I do want to, here, we'll jump back on the screen. I do want to point out we just hit an hour, and I had a sneaking suspicion this would not be enough time to cover all of, I mean, there were so many good questions that we received from registrants, but, before we let everyone log off, do we have any final thoughts from you two before we can let folks know how to best get in touch?
For me, it's good enough to get going. Focus on that phrase and practice. And what Neil said is so true. Like, it gets worse before it gets better. It's not easy. It's not intuitive. Don't tell yourself that story. Don't set that expectation in your head. It's a new platform. It's going to be a little rocky. It's going to be a little different. And you're going to need to practice it, right? So you play around with it and give yourself the permission to not be perfect for about 90 days. After 90 days, then judge yourself. And my guess would be at about the 90-day mark, you look back and you're like, actually, I kind of know what I'm doing with this thing now. But if you assume that you need to learn it within the first 7 days, and if you're not an expert in it, then you're just ridiculous and you're just not cut out for this anymore, you're going to go into a very dark place. And this platform will take you there gladly. So just give yourself the permission to get good enough to get going, come back and make it better later. And that'll help you out.
Yeah, that's great advice. Nils, any last thoughts here about the transition to GA4?
Well, I'm just going to reiterate what I said in previous webinars, like get your Google tag for Google Analytics 4 set up, let that data stream in. You don't have to use it today or tomorrow. There's still some time until June, July next year. But the sooner you get the data flowing, the more data you have to play with and to use those explore features and set up custom reports and custom graphs and funnels and flows and you name it. Because the longer you wait, the less data you'll have to work with. And the less data you have to compare trends in UA versus GA4. So maybe you made a mistake or something isn't set up properly, then it's hard to compare. Like how are you going to improve things? Chrissy or Mercer, you said earlier in the presentation, like to make things better, you first need to know what the baseline is. So if only you start grabbing data with the GA4 tag late to the deadline, then there's nothing to compare and it's too late. So get that data flowing, reach out if you need help setting things up. I think especially that Search Console bit you showed is also very interesting. I think Search Console as a whole, although it's weird how to configure it, it feels better to me once the data is flowing and once you get access to the Search Console data on top of GA4. It used to be kind of crappy. Personally, I think in UA, but anyway, let the data flow, and then there's still time to.
That's my new T-shirt. Let the data flow. I love that. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, that does seem to be the takeaway at the end of every webinar. Like, please get this set up yesterday.
Exactly right. I want to give one more resource. I put it in the chat if you can pass it on to everybody else. But I'm going to share screens here.
Oh yes.
If you do, and we set up a short link for this. This is the only reason I emphasize it. But if you go to measure.tips/GA demo, right? So measure.tips/GA demo, it'll take you to this page. So I was showing the Google. Actually, this is Google's demo store themselves. Anybody can have access to this. Everybody on this call can do it. It'll drop you to this page. All you do is you select the one that you want to have access to. So you can see like their version of Universal Analytics. You can see their version of GA4 with a game app that they have. version of GA4 with their merchandise store, an e-commerce store. It is, I'm going to repeat this, not a good example of a setup. It's a horrible example of a setup, but it's not there to say, here's how to set it up. It's there to say, here's all these reports with data in them so you can play with it and get used to it. So I know what it's like when you first start off, especially if a low traffic site. This goes back to the letting the data flow thing that Niels was talking about. When you have the data coming through and playing with it, you get a little bit more from these reports than maybe you do from your own, because you just don't have the data yet. So go ahead. It's completely free to do that. Go to the demo account, you connect it. Obviously, you got to use your Google account, whatever your Google account is, but it'll throw it in there. You select it, and then everybody has access to everything here, and you cannot break it. They just give you view only permission, so you can't change anything. If anything does change, it's because somebody else had the permissions. Like this is somebody that customized their library, but it just shows you what's possible. So again, not an example of a setup, but a really good example of the reports filled with data, so you can kind of see how they work and what they look like with a bunch of stuff coming through.
Yeah, that's great. And I do want to also mention, there was a question that we got if this is being recorded, and the answer is yes. We will be emailing out the recording of this webinar to everybody on the registrant list. And then we will also be compiling a sort of recap log and emailing that out as well. So any links or tools or anything that has been mentioned will be included in that recap log. So you can look forward to that next week. That will be emailed out. And then I also want to, well, first off, I want to thank you both for taking the time. I know we went over an hour, but there's so much good content to cover. And then I did want to also bring this back up again. Mercer mentioned this earlier. If you do want to scan the QR code, a lot of the tools that he mentioned during his demo and the strategy talk as well is available there for you. But so I'll give you a second. If you do want to take that, screen grab or scan the QR code, you can.
And then Victoria, I know one of the questions was around e-commerce and setting up e-commerce. And I know we didn't have time for it, but I wanted to make sure we address it. So I popped in the chat. You can drop it out to everybody else, and then I can share screens if you want. But on our YouTube channel, there's a ton of free training there, right? But one we just recently redid, which is the 2022 update for how to set up e-commerce in GA4. So that link will take you directly to that video. So if anybody's on how, GA4 handles e-commerce, we did one in 2021, we did in 2022. I am positive we're going to do another update in 2023 because they adjust things from time to time. But that is a pretty good deep dive on setting up e-commerce for those that were asking about that.
Awesome. Yeah, unfortunately, there were so many comments and questions that we weren't able to get to, but at least those two links, I did drop them in the comments for those who are still on the stream, and then that will be included in the recap email we'll be sending out to everyone next week. But I just want to thank you both again for so much helpful information, all the screen shares, the strategy talk. I think, this is one among many conversations we'll continue to have about this transition to GA4. So thank you both. And we'll just be emailing that recap out next week. So keep your eyes out in your inbox. All right, you guys, have a good rest of your day.
Bye.
Bye.